I never thought a few wooden posts and some wire mesh would light the match that burned down the peace in our neighborhood. Out here in Willow Creek Estates, where the roads are dusty and the sunsets are worth 1,000 paintings, folks mostly kept to themselves. We had land, space, freedom, or so I thought. I'd moved here 5 years ago, bought a modest ranch house on 10 acres, and turned it into my little slice of heaven. Horses, chickens, a few goats, and a dream of retiring in a rocking chair, with a cold glass of lemonade while watching the hills turn gold in the evening light. But like any story worth telling, paradise comes with snakes. And in Willow Creek, the biggest serpent was a 3-letter devil, HOA. Now don't get me wrong, I knew what I was signing up for. A homeowners association that claimed it was light touch, meant only to preserve property values and promote a sense of community. Sounded harmless enough. I even met some of the board members, folks with overly white teeth, pressed shirts, and an eye twitch that only appeared when you talked about letting your grass grow half an inch too long. Still, I figured as long as I wasn't throwing wild parties or building a junkyard, they'd leave me be. Boy, was I wrong. It started with my fence. I'd recently rescued 2 donkeys, real characters, both loud and stubborn, and needed to fence in a new area of the property to give them space to roam. Nothing fancy. A classic ranch fence, sturdy wood posts, horizontal beams, and some mesh wiring to keep them from wandering into Mrs. Driscoll's prize rose bushes. It matched the rustic aesthetic of the property, was well within county zoning code, and didn't block any views. Heck, it even looked better than the chain-link monstrosity the Wilsons had on the other side of the subdivision. I built it with my own 2 hands over a week, sunburned, sore, and proud of what I'd accomplished. Then the letter came. Certified mail. That's how you know they mean business. I opened it at my kitchen table, coffee in one hand, thinking maybe it was a reminder about the annual HOA picnic. Nope. Notice of non-compliance. Unauthorized structure, erected without approval. What? My jaw dropped. According to the letter, my fence violated Section 7, Paragraph B, Subsection 4 of the HOA bylaws. Something about exterior modifications requiring pre-approval by the Architectural Review Committee. They claimed I hadn't submitted the correct forms, that the height was aesthetic nuisance, and that my use of non-uniform post spacing degraded the visual cohesion of the community. They fined me $1,200 for a fence that sat entirely on my property and kept my donkeys from turning my neighbor's petunias into salad. I laughed at first, thought it had to be a mistake. Called up the HOA office. Got transferred 3 times before landing on Linda, the community compliance liaison, which I'm pretty sure is code for neighborhood snitch. She had that brittle, forced kindness that's really just a disguise for self-importance. She repeated the rule back to me like she was reciting scripture. I told her I was happy to meet and show her the fence. She declined. Told me I had 10 days to pay the fine or face escalating penalties. I felt the heat rise in my chest. I spent the next few days diving into the bylaws like I was studying for the bar exam. Found out the board had quietly updated the fence regulations last year, slipping in restrictions about materials and visual impact under the radar during a poorly attended virtual meeting. Typical. I also found something else. While they had power to enforce HOA rules, they had zero control over county zoning codes. That little detail tucked into a paragraph most people probably skipped. That would be the crack I needed to wedge open the gates of revenge. But I didn't act on impulse. No, I played the long game. Over the next few weeks, I attended every HOA meeting. Quiet, observant, friendly even. I brought cookies, asked questions, learned their weaknesses. Turns out the president of the board, Gregory Morton, had big dreams of turning the communal greenbelt into a boutique vineyard. The vice president, Sharon, was paranoid about property values and obsessed with cleanliness. She once fined a neighbor $50 for leaving a garden hose coiled improperly. And then there was Craig, the treasurer, who had a secret side hustle flipping properties, which technically violated HOA ethics rules. All useful intel. But I needed more. So I called in a favor from an old buddy, Larry, who worked for the county planning office. I asked him a simple question. What's the current zoning classification for the HOA common area? He looked it up and nearly choked on his coffee. Technically, agricultural residential. The HOA never formally rezoned it after incorporation, meaning, and here's the beautiful part, it could be used for certain approved agricultural functions, including, as the county code spelled out in plain black and white, the temporary or semi-permanent storage of livestock waste, provided containment protocols are followed. In short, I could legally apply to rezone the common area, which sat right behind the HOA's fancy clubhouse, as a manure storage facility. I grinned so hard I scared my dog. But I didn't file anything yet. No, first I sent an appeal letter about the fence. I laid out my case calmly, professionally, and cited every code they'd misapplied. I included photos. I included witness statements, from my donkeys, naturally, and respectfully requested the fine be waived. They rejected it. Unanimously, that was their last mistake. The next morning, I filed a zoning adjustment request with the county. Attached to it was a detailed proposal outlining the benefits of a community organic manure processing and storage initiative, complete with diagrams, storage container plans, and a vague mention of future compost-based educational programs. I had Larry flag it for review, and by the end of the week, it was on the agenda for the next zoning board meeting. I waited until the day before that meeting to notify the HOA. My letter was short, professional, delivered by courier, hand-signed, with a copy of the rezoning application attached. The board went ballistic. My phone rang non-stop. Gregory left 3 voicemails, each one progressively more desperate and shrill. Sharon emailed me a 4-page document full of threats, half of which were legally invalid. Craig offered to waive my fence fine entirely, if I dropped the application. But it was too late. I had them in check. The only thing left was to wait for the zoning board's decision. And I made sure the community knew about it too. Flyers went up. Posts hit the local neighborhood Facebook group. Suddenly, the same people who backed the HOA out of fear or indifference were lining up behind me. Because nothing unites people, like the fear of living next to a giant mountain of manure. And I hadn't even started phase 2 of my plan yet. By the time the zoning board hearing rolled around, I wasn't nervous, I wasn't mad, I was ready. I'd been sharpening this plan for weeks, every move calculated like a game of chess played on a board made of hay bales and homeowner grievances. The sun rose early that day, golden light spilling over the hills as I pulled on my boots, hitched up my trailer, and made my way to the county administration building with a binder full of documents, 3 large poster boards, and a gallon of fresh manure sealed tightly in a mason jar, for effect, of course. Just a whiff of strategy. The parking lot was already buzzing when I arrived. HOA board members stood in a tight, panicked cluster near the building entrance, Gregory pacing with wild eyes, Sharon clutching her printed bylaws like a life preserver, and Craig muttering into his phone with the same expression a gambler has when he's just realized the house always wins. They spotted me, and the moment our eyes met, the silence thickened like a summer storm. I tipped my hat. They scowled. Inside the hearing room, the energy was electric. Every seat was filled. Local residents had shown up in droves, not because they supported manure storage, but because they supported me. Over the last week, I'd become something of a folk hero in Willow Creek. The man who stood up to the HOA, the rancher who said, "Enough." I didn't ask them to pick sides. I just told the truth. And the truth, my friend, was potent. The meeting kicked off with formalities. Then came my turn to present. I stepped up to the podium, clicked on the first slide of my humble but convincing PowerPoint, and began. Ladies and gentlemen of the zoning board, I come before you today not as a man with a vendetta, but as a steward of the land. Our county zoning code allows for agricultural use on this tract, and my proposal, a modest, responsibly managed manure containment facility, is fully compliant with all regulations. It is environmentally sound, strategically placed, and serves the long-term goal of promoting organic soil enrichment and sustainable land use. Then I leaned in slightly, lowered my voice, and added with a smirk. Also, it sends a clear message that rural values and reasonable property rights still matter. I pulled out the mason jar, held it up like a sacred relic, and said, "This is the future of fertilizer, folks." The room erupted in laughter. Even the zoning board chair cracked a smile. Gregory leapt from his seat. "This is an abuse of the system," he shouted, arms flailing. "He's doing this out of spite." The chair banged his gavel. "Sir, please sit down." But Gregory didn't. He launched into a tirade about how I was corrupting the neighborhood, lowering property values, and dragging Willow Creek's reputation through the dirt. Every word made him sound more unhinged. And then he said it, the sentence that would become infamous throughout the community. "This man is weaponizing animal waste." That was the moment the board lost the room. I calmly replied, "No." "Sir, I'm using my legal rights under Zoning Code Section 12, subsection B. The same code your HOA board overlooked when it tried to control land it never properly reclassified." It was a checkmate so perfect it might as well have come with fireworks. The board deliberated for 20 minutes. When they returned, the chair cleared his throat and said, "While unconventional, Mr. Holloway's proposal is within zoning limits. Unless a formal objection is filed with cause, the application is approved." The room exploded. Some cheered, some gasped, and the HOA board turned pale. Gregory looked like he'd swallowed a scorpion. I didn't rush the next steps. I was methodical. Over the following week, I set up a temporary storage shed near the common area's edge, not even close to any homes. I worked with a local composting company to deliver hay-lined storage containers. I held a ribbon-cutting ceremony. I invited kids to come learn about composting and soil regeneration. Suddenly, what was meant to be a petty act of vengeance was a full-blown community movement. But here's the twist. I didn't actually store much manure. Turns out, I didn't need to. Just the possibility of livestock waste lingering behind the HOA's precious clubhouse was enough to start a grassroots revolt. Neighbors who'd lived in silent fear of the board's fines and threats started speaking out. People demanded transparency. Old bylaw abuses were dug up. Turns out the HOA had been siphoning funds for maintenance projects that never materialized. Sharon's pressure washing contract, her cousin's company, Craig's landscaping gig, a shell company he controlled. Within 2 months, a vote of no confidence swept through the community. Gregory, Sharon, and Craig were all booted from their positions. The new board was made up of actual neighbors, folks with common sense, who understood that fences weren't threats and that manure didn't stink half as bad as abuse of power. And as for my fence, it stayed. In fact, the new board asked me to help rewrite the HOA rules to better reflect rural values and modern realities. I was handed a seat on the Architectural Review Committee, but I declined. I didn't want a seat at the table. I just wanted my ranch, my peace, and my donkeys. And let's be real, I'd already made my point. Months later, Gregory moved out. Rumor had it he tried to start another HOA in a new subdivision, but was promptly told to shove his rules where. The compost don't stink. Sharon, last I heard, was running a Facebook group for HOA awareness and preservation, which had 3 members, herself, her cat, and someone who thought it was a gardening club. As for Craig, well, the county investigated his property flipping scheme, and let's just say he's no longer in real estate. The best part? Every spring now I host a Manure Matters event on the Greenbelt. We teach composting, garden planning, and natural fertilizer application. Kids play games, neighbors mingle, and every single person who shows up gets a free t-shirt with the slogan, "Fence me in, and I'll fence you out." So what's the lesson here? Sometimes, when life gives you manure, make compost. But more importantly, don't let bullies in blazers and clipboards push you around. Whether you live on 10 acres or a tiny cul-de-sac, stand your ground, know your rights, And when they fine you for offense, just remember, sometimes the stink of justice is the sweetest scent of all. If someone had told me a year ago that I'd become a local legend because of a fence and a few buckets of manure, I would have said they'd spent too much time sniffing the compost. But life has a funny way of turning small battles into full-blown revolutions. And out here in Willow Creek, where the sunsets are honest and the land remembers, things had changed, not just for me, but for everyone who ever felt the quiet chokehold of HOA tyranny. After the HOA board fell apart, there was a strange silence in the neighborhood, the kind of hush that follows a long storm. At first, folks were unsure. Years of HOA dominance had conditioned them to double-check mailbox heights, measure lawn growth with rulers, and whisper when discussing rule violations. But now there was room to breathe. My phone rang constantly, not with complaints, but with thanks. People dropped by with pies, fresh eggs, handmade thank you cards. One old fellow, Mr. Talbot, who hadn't spoken at an HOA meeting in 5 years, brought me a rusty horseshoe and said, "Son, you kicked their behinds better than a mule in a hornet nest." Still, there was cleanup to do, not just literal. The manure project didn't exactly sparkle, but emotional and communal. The new HOA board, composed of ranchers, retirees, and a no-nonsense librarian named Edna, set out to rebuild trust. I wasn't on the board. I didn't want power. I just wanted people to stop living in fear of hanging the wrong color wind chime. But fate wasn't done with me. About 3 months after the Great Manure Rebellion, I got a letter from a nearby subdivision. Not another complaint, but an invitation. Apparently, my story had gone a bit viral. A neighbor's niece posted a clip of me holding that mason jar of manure at the zoning hearing. It spread online like wildfire. The man who beat the HOA with horse poop. That's what they called me. Ridiculous. Yes. But it got views. Now other communities were reaching out. Some begging for advice, others asking if I could help. Them fight their own out-of-control HOAs. I laughed at first. What did I know? I wasn't a lawyer or a politician. I was just a rancher who read the fine print and wasn't afraid of smelling like truth. But the requests kept coming. So I did what any stubborn country boy would do. I made a website, fencefreedom.org, a simple site with tools, zoning guides, real stories, and one golden rule written across the top. Don't let them fence your freedom. It exploded. Emails poured in. People from Florida, Texas, even California shared their horror stories. Fined for flags, banned from chickens, sued for vegetable gardens. Turns out the HOA problem wasn't just a Willow Creek thing. It was national. And suddenly I found myself standing at the edge of something bigger than my backyard. I started visiting towns, helping folks organize. I didn't charge a dime. I called it Manure Missions. We'd meet in barns, garages, or community centers. I'd bring cinnamon rolls, and they'd bring bylaws and grievances. And together, we'd rewrite rules, stand up at meetings, and in one memorable case, host a Freedom Fence Festival, where we built a 100-foot decorative fence just to spite a board president who banned wood grain. And all the while, back at home, things only got better. The old Greenbelt? Now a thriving community garden and learning space. Kids plant carrots where HOA officers once patrolled with clipboards. The clubhouse that once hosted boring policy meetings. Now the site of weekend farmers markets and composting workshops. And yes, my donkeys, now local celebrities, get more fan mail than I do. One even got a spot in the county fair mascot parade. His name's Carl. He's a diva. But let me tell you what really made me realize how far we'd come. It was spring, almost a year since the fence drama began. I was out mending a gate when a young couple pulled up to the end of my driveway. City folks, clean boots, confused GPS voices still echoing in their car. They rolled down the window, and the woman leaned out. "Are you the manure guy?" I nodded, braced myself for a joke, but she smiled, wide-eyed. "We're moving out here, got 5 acres down the road. We heard about what you did. We're just excited to raise our kids somewhere folks still fight for each other. And in that moment, I knew. It wasn't about the fence. It was never just about the fence. It was about dignity, about standing your ground when the world tries to shrink your space with rules and red tape, about knowing your rights, using your voice, and not being afraid to smell a little like manure if it means keeping your freedom intact. So yeah, the HOA fined me. They tried to break me, but instead, they built something far more powerful, a movement.